and welcome to the live before lock Q&A edition of the Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuce 85, and I'm joined this morning by my friend on the West Coast, Jake Kuchek, the San Francisco guy. We are out here going to be answering all of your questions, comments, and concerns. And since we didn't have Jake on Thursday, we'll get his take on a few spots that he likes, get his Jake Kuchek slate breaker line, and give you any prize picks, underdogs, betting opportunities that we might be seeing. Before we delve into that stuff and talk about ownership as well, do our normal routine on Saturday mornings. Jake, I don't normally have you with me this morning. Hope it looks like you're cheery mood. You're usually awake anyway, so it's good to have you here. How are you feeling about this upcoming slate and I guess the first full week of college football?
Yeah, man. I'm excited to be here. Nice to be getting going bright and early on a Saturday morning. Still 8 o'clock here for us West Coast folks. So got the coffee in me already. Kids woke me up pretty early, so we're ready to go. We're ready to party. We're setting up a bounce house in the backyard, so you may hear some stuff going on in the background, but we'll try to keep it tight. This is a phenomenal slate, wide open. Lots of different ways that we can go, lots of different choices, lots of opportunity for our opponents to make mistakes. It's exactly the way that I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll kind of kick things off talking a little bit about projected ownership and overlap. Being that the Saturday main slate is a 12-gamer, you like to think that there's plenty of opportunities to find leverage, and there definitely is. And I've been giving DraftKings some kudos this week. They've priced all of their slates fairly decently. There is a couple of egregious errors on this one, which is going to lead to overlap. Right now, just pulling up some of the ownership stuff, the top three at each position looks like Kieran Drones, Will Howard, and it was Quinn Ewers earlier this morning as a top three at quarterback, but now Pittsburgh quarterback just announced Eli Holstein, who is only 5'4", is riding up the board there, becoming quite popular since he's a cheap value play. Some people are very hell-bent on playing a quarterback in the Superflex. No matter what, we are one of the few people and groups in the industry that are okay playing a running back in Superflex. So Holstein is starting to get very popular, which may be a bit of a curveball for some. At the running back position here, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to be up against, in single entry, cash game, stuff like that, you're going to be up against LaQuint Allen, who's underpriced. That's one of the egregious pricing errors. Ollie Gordon, Desmond Reed, and then also, of course, Jaden Blue, some combination of those three, and a lot of people going to try out the 4 running back thing today. Also, right on the outside there in the top 5 is my man Bayshell Tootin, who I'm very, very high on and represents a good piece of leverage today with all of the folks who are on Kieran Drones, but also as kind of a direct leverage pivot off of Jaden Blue as well, since they're such close in pricing. So those are the running back quarterbacks. Let me pull up the wide receivers here. Xavier Restrepo projecting as one of the most popular receivers. Not that surprised to see it. Very safe option, 6'7", a price point that we can get to with his value. Oronde Gadsden, because he's priced at 3.5. And then it's between Eugene Wilson, who's a little spendy for my taste, and Brennan Presley, which is a little bit of a surprise to me. I think people are warming up to that Oklahoma State stack there with Alan Bowman. They might throw the football a lot potentially if South Dakota State can stay in it. So Presley there is one of the more popular receivers as well. And then one of my personal favorites, Torrey Horton, right on the outside of that top 5 in ownership. So those are the popular plays. Now, I know talking in the Discord this morning, I was talking about some of that. You were surprised to hear that Will Howard might have been one of the top 2 or 3 there. What's your thoughts on that? Because we know what Howard can do and what he can't do, but I think it has more to do with the fact that Ohio State people kind of, know it's a high-flying offense, regardless of who the quarterback is, and I think it has more to do with that than his actual skill set. So what's your take there, hearing that your opponent lineups may have a lot of Will Howard today?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 parts to that. The first part is we saw that Kyle McCord wasn't CJ Stroud, right? Like we watched that entire thing happen last year, and every week I was like, maybe Kyle McCord just isn't really it. And that was true every single week. And they had to get it done via the ground game more often than not. Harrison certainly, did his thing, and he's next level ultra world talent. And they have plenty of talented receivers, don't get me wrong. But I don't think that Will Howard is the guy that is going to get the most out of those receivers, just like Kyle McCord didn't get. We didn't get 500-yard and 5-touchdown games from Kyle McCord the way that we did from CJ Stroud on the regular. We got just enough production to support, a 9K Marvin Harrison, and you can't really live off of that with a high-priced quarterback that's only throwing to one receiver, and only getting a dynamic game out of one receiver. And while we have talent, we have a little less proven talent. But really, more the second point for me is, why are they throwing at all in this game? They're not going to have to throw at all. They're going to play. This is an elite Ohio State defense going up against a cupcake. They'll be up by 3 scores in the first quarter. Henderson and Judkins will probably both have touchdowns at that point. I can see, a couple passing touchdowns happening in the first and second quarters. In the third and fourth quarters, if Will Howard is still in the game, he's going to be handing off. You don't want your quarterback. In fact, this is how little of Will Howard I want. I don't even know what he's priced at. He's what, 8K, something like that. You don't want your 8K quarterback handing off or not being in the game in the third quarter. So that was more the shock to me. Not that the Ohio State offense isn't up to snuff. They very much are. In fact, they're too good for this spot, which is why I'm off of him, and I'm surprised to see that a generally sharp college football ownership is coalescing around a moderately expensive Will Howard.
Yeah. Checking in at 8.5 over on DraftKings, pretty wild.
8.5.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, it's a pretty cheap price. Isolated Emeka Egbuka at 7K. It's kind of surprising to see Eugene Wilson pushing towards 30%, because I'm not high on the Gators at all. And I would think that if you're going to play Howard, you might want to get some Egbuka, but he's kind of under 10% as of this moment. And of course, it's really early in the season. Some of the ownership projections are going to be wonky, but it seems like Howard is just a little bit lacking the upside there at that price point. And it does seem like a slate to go cheap. But if I was going to go there, personally, I'd be at Cam Ward. And that kind of segues into our quarterback talk here. I want to get your take on, a handful, 2 or 3 quarterbacks that you're really kind of zeroing in on here in your lineups for DraftKings today.
Yeah. So I do like drones. I don't know that I'm going to get to the full drones Tootin Felton pairing. At least not that Felton. That seems like kind of too much. I think that they run away with this one. As much as I would love to believe that Diego Pavia is going to show up and keep this game close, and we've seen what he can do against lower level competition, I don't think that happens today. I think this is a pretty easy one for drones. The difference between drones and a guy like Will Howard is that drones will be very involved in whatever ways Vatek is moving the football down the field and scoring. And there's the potential for, multiple rushing touchdowns from drones. Whereas I don't think we're going to get that from Will Howard. I've been surprised before, but I don't see them running a whole lot of quarterback at Ohio State. So I think that the drones and Tootin combo, doing both of them in the same lineup will probably set you apart a little bit, but I like it because there's involvement on both sides, and both of those guys are, extremely efficient and talented. So drones is a big one for me and everybody. I think that's not a contrarian pick. One that might be a little bit less popular is our boy Raiola, who he won the camp competition. There was some question as to whether he was going to be a full-time starting quarterback or if he was going to be like a 1A, 1B with Harburg. And, they solidified that, eliminated the elephant in the room, and they're just going to turn over the keys and let it rip. And going up against UTEP is a pretty good place to start that, build confidence. I think that we get 304 from Rayola, which is probably just enough at that 8-2 price tag to justify it. And if we get anything on the ground, or if we get, even more than that in terms of the touchdowns, that's just icing on the cake. I'm hoping he comes in a little bit lower owned than I think is deserving. But if we get him at 6 to 8%, and especially if we get the receiver right that we're pairing with him, I do think that the Rayola Banks combo, because it's extremely expensive, will be lower owned than it should be. Banks obviously pretty explosive receiver, and hoping to have a big game out of him today. I think that could do very well for us, shooting us up the leaderboard late in the day. So definitely on Rayola. And then I'm gonna take a shot on your Gronkowski. We're live by the brand, die by the brand. And FCS quarterbacks in not the easiest matchups, but low prices and lots of alpha and meat on the bone available. So that's who I'm focused on.
Yeah, really hoping that Gronkowski can get us a similar stat line, or even better, of course, that we got out of Cam Miller going up against Colorado. Had a couple rushing touchdowns, almost 300 passing yards. Miller, much more of a prolific dual threat than Gronkowski is, but we're talking about a multi-time national champion. And just a really good player that I think is going to turn some heads today. And this is a player that is got NFL draft talk. There's scouts who are watching him. So that, to me, the price is just so cheap at 6-1 for somebody who can flip 30 fantasy points or more. And at worst, if he gives us a 15 to 18 or low 20s, we're not completely out of it because of how cheap his price is. Now, with the knowledge that Holstein from Pitt is getting into people's lineups and he tears it up, that could potentially be a problem. But for the most part, I'm very comfortable using the Jackrabbit starting quarterback. So moving on to the running backs, there are a plethora of them. We're big proponents again of the 4 running back build. Some people are very hard line. You got to play a quarterback in the super flex. There is no other way. When we first really started talking about doing this 2 or 3 years ago, got a lot of side eyes, but our community at least is very on board with the 4 running backs. Every slate I get asked, is this a 4 running back slate? And when you look at today, there's a good 7, 8, 9 different running backs that I'd be happy to use. We are pigeonholed into a few because of pricing and opportunities, knowing that there's so many committees in college football now, but we have 2 certifiable bell cows, at least on paper, in LaQuint Allen and Desmond Reed, both under 5.5K, both projecting as mega chalk. No surprise there. I assume you'll be heavy on those 2 as well. If so, a few thoughts on them, and then any other running backs that you're looking at today.
Yeah. So I am going to have, a lot of both. I think that makes sense. The volume is difficult to compete with. The part of it that is interesting to me is if we're getting Holstein's team, and if Gadsden is as popular, as we expect him to be, given the extremely low price on him for the volume that he's going to get. Are people going to want multiple pieces that are negatively correlated with their running backs from the Pitt and Syracuse offenses? To me, that's probably too much exposure to offenses that we don't expect to necessarily go absolutely ham. And could that reduce the ownership from the expected levels on Allen and Reed? I don't know. Maybe it stops the steam in its tracks on Holstein and Gadsden. I think it's going to be interesting to see. We don't know for sure, but I'm going to stick with Reed and LaQuint Allen. Like we have to. It's just too much volume at those low prices, and I don't see much benefit in fading them. To talk about some other guys, obviously we like Jaden Blue. I like Branson Robinson as, maybe a little bit of a pivot off of like the absolute chalk, still in that same price range. If you want to throw in a Reed, Robinson, and Allen, running back trio, you can spend a lot of money in other places. That's one way to get to that Rayola Banks combo and still be comfortable everywhere else. And so that's another piece that's interesting. Damian Martinez, I think you had brought him up in the chat. Love Damian Martinez and love him in this context of an offense that has other options and can throw the ball down the field, and they have to respect Cam Ward's ability to distribute the ball, deep a little bit more than teams had to against DJU. And so there should be more room to run for Damian Martinez. And he's also a natural pivot off of an extremely popular Restrepo. So if, we get a scenario where Restrepo catches a 20-yard pass but gets tackled at the 4, and then we get Martinez punching it in 2 or 3 times after that, that's like it's not receiver to receiver leverage, but it's receiver to running back leverage in terms of who gets the score. And so with everyone going cheap at running back for the most part, I think that's a really interesting spot to spend up. Besides that, I don't necessarily have another kind of niche off the wall running back play. The Ohio State guys, I would love to get to 7.5 for a running back on this play. I don't think it's necessary. They'll both probably get 80 plus yards and a touchdown or 2, but at that price you really need 102 if not 103 to justify spending that much salary at running back, right? So I don't think that either the Ohio State guys or anybody else besides maybe Martinez has legitimate upside for that. We should give a mention to Cedric Alexander. I think if Vandy does keep it competitive, he's heavily involved, and with we always want to see a mobile quarterback draw a lot of attention away from a running back and open up some extra lanes for a running back. So I think that there's an opportunity for Cedric Alexander to do some things in the future. This is not necessarily the ideal spot for him. I don't think that they're going to impose their will on Vatek by any means, but another name to consider. And he's also kind of in that low 5s price range where I would expect ownership to coalesce around a lot of other names and not necessarily him. So as a low owned play, he's an interesting guy to think about as well.
Definitely. Just a crazy amount of overlap with these running backs though. So like that you threw that name out there. We got Tootin that we feel like is going to be probably a little under-owned more than he should be, obviously paying up for Ollie Gordon. And then as high as I am on Gronkowski and having him in my main build, do want to mention the SDSU starting running back, Amar Johnson, who sits there at 4.5. He's going to be taking, 15 to 20 carry share. He'll get targeted a little bit. He's definitely a guy that can succeed against this Oklahoma State team as well. And he's going to have minimal ownership across the board. We're talking about 9 to 10% for Gronkowski, less than 2% for Amar Johnson. So an additional bit there, especially for those of you who are doing the 150 lineups or 20 plus. There's some room there for Amar Johnson to end up partially optimal or straight up on the top lineup. So did want to throw that name out there. And then just circling back around, Reed, this is one of those moments where, there's a player that's starting to pick up ownership here late as we get to lock. If that means people are going to start peeling back on Desmond Reed, that's better for us. I think sometimes we get in this habit in all sports, but especially true in college basketball and partially in college football. But we get these news, chunks that happen, these trinkets of information, and we start doing these moves with our lineups and making switches. And then more often than not, it's like, I should have left that alone. look what happened here. Reed has just rushed for 150 and 3. So I don't want to get any crazy there. I do think if people are playing Holstein, they're maybe considering doing them together. I don't know how well that's going to be. And we need to remember that just because he's starting, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to go out there and sling the rock a bunch of times. Pete Thamel of ESPN and the coaching staff at Pittsburgh, Coach Narduzzi, has been on record saying that he's going to play both quarterbacks just to kind of get a feel for, if Nate Yarnell can pick it up this year, if he can kind of hold Holstein off. So there's the not only lost carries and the workload that Reed's going to get, but also the possibility of Yarnell coming in, maybe not every other series, but certainly for what will amount to probably a quarter's worth of snaps. So, Holstein might look good at 5-4 there, but I feel like that one might be way too cute. With that being said, he doesn't have to do a whole lot to pay that price off, and he is getting a relatively soft MAC opponent. The MAC, man, what's happened to the mighty MAC? It's really fallen off. All right, we'll move over to wide receiver now. Now we know what the public is on. We know the overlap where that's going to be. Which wide receivers are you looking at here? Any sneaks, and which chalk plays are kind of locking in for you?
Yeah, so I mean, Restrepo is popular for good reason. Obviously, going to have some exposure to him. Actually, a lot of receivers in that game are pretty viable. With starting with Restrepo, but Jacoby George also on the Miami side. If you're doing Cam Ward, definitely exposure to both of those, and then on the Florida side. Eugene Wilson being one of the most expensive receivers on the slate does kind of help reduce ownership for him. I don't love, tying my my financial incentives to Graham Mertz in any way, shape, or form, but he's shown some improvement, and he has a talented receiver room. Not necessarily going to get to Eugene Wilson, but I understand the thought behind the play. I do like the idea of Elijah Badger at only 5,600. It's a cheaper way to get that Florida receiver room exposure, and we have to give a shout to Sam Brown. Seen some explosiveness out of him in the past. But really, the focus in that game is Restrepo. As far as some other folks that maybe are not being considered, or at least aren't as chalky as a Restrepo or similar type of receiver type play, Torrey Horton, I assume people are going to be on. That's not off the wall. Despite the price, he's mega talented. And I think we'll get a ton of volume and well exceed that 6.9 price tag. So that's not really an off the wall play. Banks, just because of the price tag and the fact that pairing him is prohibitively expensive for a lot of people, I think might be a little bit less popular. I'm not going to say he's going to be a low owned play, but lower than Restrepo or Horton. The guy that I am kind of interested in that I think will actually potentially be a sneak. A lot of people have, especially if they're playing drones, do I play Daquan Felton to get all of that upside? The Felton that nobody's talking about is Ty Felton. I haven't seen anybody mention Ty Felton at only 4,800. Extremely explosive vertical threat against a UConn secondary that gives up all the yardage and all the explosive plays. I think that we are going to get a huge game out of Ty Felton. We saw him go absolutely bonkers against Indiana last year. 7 catches for 134 yards and 3 touchdowns, doing most of his damage in the first half. It ended up being a very non-competitive game. That could have been easily a 200-yard game if Indiana had stayed in it. So at only 4,800 against UConn, if UConn can do anything to keep it close, which I think they might, we could see a huge game out of Ty Felton at what I would expect to be pretty low ownership, just because no one's mentioned him at all until this moment. So that's probably the biggest sneak that I have at any position, or the biggest line in the sand explosive play that I'm hoping for that isn't going to be mega chalk. What are your thoughts on Ty Felton?
Yeah, I like that call. As I was going through my write-up, I had Caden Prather listed as one of the additional options, and I put in the blurb there, baby Tua gone. If there's consistency at the quarterback position, Prather and Ty Felton, those are the two guys. And Maryland has consistently had a talented wide receiver room. Unfortunately, the QB play and defense has not been consistent. But you're right. This is a great matchup. Pretty much the group think tank, if you will, has placed the community and the industry on 6-7 receivers, and nobody, like you said, is going to be using the Maryland guys. And there's potential there for slate breaking like performance from Felton or even Prather, who are both priced just below 5K. So that's a very interesting call there. Even on the other side in that UConn game, there's some pretty neat options there. TJ Sheffield, Skylar Bell, some exposure there to maybe a mini stack from this one could work out, as I'm not a believer in either of these teams. But yeah, I do like the Felton play there. If this were a slate where value was a little bit harder to find and it was like, week 6, I think you might see a lot more people looking at that 4.8 price for Felton saying, yeah, let's go. But you're not going to probably get him at that price for very long, especially if he performs today like you're indicating. So certainly like that. I'll go back around to Horton. He's just outside for my ownership projections, which again are not supremely accurate just yet, so take it with a grain of salt, but he's just outside the top 5 there, 6'9". My hope is that the price point worries people a little bit, but he just makes so much sense to use. Texas secondary last year, Huskies really made it look bad all season long. We were able to target against it. I don't know that I believe it's going to be so good this year that they're going to be shutting people down. Quarterback play for Colorado State is actually pretty solid, all things considering. Fowler Nicolosi had offers to go to some P4 teams, NIL deals, didn't take it. His passing volume this year is going to be just ridiculous. There's no Dallin Holker around. There's, a lot of the other options gone now. This is truly Horton's team. And I think we're talking about a guy who's going to have 125 targets at minimum this season. He had 90 last year, and it starts today. If you think that Savion Williams game yesterday was incredible with his 15 targets or whatever he ended up having, just wait until you see what Horton does today. I truly believe in the first quarter he may end up with 8 or 9 targets, and they're going to really be peppering him a lot. So that 6'9" price point to me matters none. We have all this value. So he's one of my favorite receivers. I'm playing the Restrepo chalk as well, just because I'm high on Miami and I have the salary to actually pay up at wide receiver, which is pretty different from what I normally do. I like to pay up at running back, get those receivers that are cheap, but with the value that we have, it just makes too much sense. Because I'm high on Gronowski, my off-the-wall receiver option, I guess, would be another cheap guy that's the same price as your boy Felton, Griffin Wilde of South Dakota State, priced there at 4.8. Gadke, the bros, the family fare at wide receiver, they're off to the next level. This is Wilde's team in terms of being the WR1. He is the alpha, and we can expect really big things out of him this year. He is going to get a ton of targets, and they're going to use him in a variety of ways. And he is a big-time threat that can take the teeth right out, or the soul out of the defense, and he can take it, he can house one at any time. He had a touchdown of 75 yards last year, obviously against some FCS teams, but I'm really confident in this squad, and I do like the idea of using Wilde with Gronowski and kind of having that stack there, because I don't think anybody is going to do so. And looking at what his projected ownership would be, I think it gets to maybe 5 or 6%, which may be a little higher than I would hope, but still not enough to be wasted if he goes off. We'll be able to bury part of the field if he has a good game. So Griffin Wilde is the receiver play that I'm playing there that I feel pretty damn good about. All right, and then of course we know Gadsden's cheap. He's going to be popular, like you mentioned. Clemson, Georgia, there's some potential there in a close game, but since it's not showdown, we don't have to talk about Jake Brenningstool. Let me pull up some of the questions that we've got here. All right, let's see. This is on FanDuel. Eugene Wilson, Jaden Blue, or Bashil Tupin and 24. What would be your lean there? I know you don't play a lot on FanDuel, so you can ignore that part, but just straight up in a vacuum, what pairing would you be more comfortable with?
Who's the second player in the second pairing?
Horton and Tootin versus Wilson and Blue.
I think Horton and Tootin pretty easily for me on that one.
Love it. Yeah, that's where I would be as well. I'm not probably the best one to ask about Florida because I have a ton of futures on Miami. I do not believe in Florida doing well this year. I don't think they even win 4 games. Wilson is a great receiver. Do not get me wrong, but they paid all this money for Badger. They have Chimere Dike. There's other weapons. Mertz is not necessarily some sort of gunslinger. Montreal Johnson is healthy. I just don't know that Wilson is worthy of a 7-1 price point right now. Could easily eat my words and he could go 8-102, and that may happen, but I just don't see him being worth paying up for at a near 30% ownership level on this particular slate. So it's kind of how I feel with that there. Let me just scroll through here. I think we got most of these answered. A few people asking about fading Restrepo, Jacoby George or Samuel Brown. My preference there would be George. I know you mentioned him earlier. Brown transferring in from Houston. He's definitely going to have a solid season, but George, knows that offense and just kind of seems like the de facto WR2 there. And then a bit of a sneak would be the tight end who's finally healthy, Elijah Arroyo. Not using him in my lineup. Don't want to get too cute here, which I have a tendency to do, but do have his anytime touchdown prop in at plus 425 on DK. I do feel like he's going to score a touchdown today. And Bayshell Tootin, I feel like scores 2+ touchdowns. So those are 2 of my favorite props. High Roland mentions SDSU line jumping all over. Any news about someone being out? Not that I have seen, but that is a good segue into the news. We'll do a news dump here real quick. Plus they're 13-point dogs now. I think they were they 9.5 not that long ago. So some money coming in on Oklahoma State, I guess. Mike Wright named the starter at Northwestern. I still think we might see both. Remember a couple of years ago at Vanderbilt, Wright was like mega chalk a couple of weeks, which you and I were like, huh? And that didn't work out. Diego Pavia named the starter for Vanderbilt. That was what we expected to happen. So good news there. Allie Jennings coming back from the serious injury, suited up. We'll see what we get out of him at Virginia Tech. I'm a little bit nervous about the rust there, but a elite talent, obviously. Hoping that he does well. His price is so cheap, but I just can't seem to pull the trigger there just yet in terms of being all in on him. If he was healthy coming into it, I would certainly be a lot higher. And then just double check here. Well, I'm looking for any more news. Why don't you drop some any PrizePicks or underdog plays that you're looking at currently with the board?
Yeah. So let's just make sure that we can still get them. So I guess first thing, if you are on the PrizePicks, there's since it's week 1, there's a ton of free square type things to take advantage of. Like the easiest one, there's a Jalen Milroe over half a passing yard. So it's just like, okay, you get a freebie on that. So you can only do like $25 on them, but if you're doing the PrizePicks, you might as well do those and incorporate those into your pairings. Because I like Ty Felton, and because I think he's going to have an explosive game, I'm on that over 61.5 receiving yards. I think we see him get over 100 today. I think there are also touchdowns that happen with him, but we'll take the yards. I will also take Damian Martinez. I got it at 73.5. It's gone up to 76.5. But I still like the over on that one. I usually am big on the receptions field, and usually there's some room there. There are not a lot of options available in the receptions pool. I don't know why that is. And so we're going to keep an eye on that throughout the day. I don't particularly like any of the ones that are available as of right now. We also have the Demons and Goblins in play on PrizePicks, where you get the the outsized return for a demon and the underwhelming return for the goblin. And so if we were on Tootin for multiple touchdowns, we do have a goblin on Tootin over 1.5 rushing plus receiving touchdowns. So if he gets in the end zone twice by land or by air, we get that outsized payoff. And I really like that one. I think he's going to be heavily involved. And I think, 2 touchdowns is a very reasonable expectation, which is a weird thing to say for anyone, but I think he's involved enough that we can hope for that. And I think that is, closer to a par pricing type of play as opposed to a true demon play. So I think there's some value there. I also am interested in all of the Raiola props, wherever you can find them. Yards, touchdowns, underdog, PrizePicks. I think he absolutely smashes whatever markets think of him. And so, going to be pretty heavily invested both in the DFS lineups and also in the PrizePicks and underdog overs for Raiola. I think he has a great game.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Getting some questions in our Discord, just asking for some additional thoughts on the Georgia running back situation. That was the other bit of news. Trevor Etienne dealing with a suspension, so he will not be playing. That brings up the Branson Robinson play that you had mentioned. He's only 4.8. And then we had a very brief conversation earlier this morning about who the backup would be. And it sounds like that's Nate Frazier, who is sitting there at min price. So if you want a super punt value for the large field GBP stuff, perhaps you can use Frazier there. We know Georgia likes to mix it up, rotate their running backs anyways. They'll find a way even without Etienne. There's a lot of talent in this running back room. All right. Our man Jamie jumping in late asks, is Badger still okay? Just need Elijah Badger. It's okay. It's cheap. And then he asked Restrepo, Wilde, or Badger George. So the side I'd be on would be Restrepo and Wilde. I have both of those guys in my main. I'm really committed to the Gronkowski play. I do want one of his weapons. If he goes off, it's going to be passes to him, similar to what we saw out of our man Sharp yesterday for Oklahoma. And that I just feel like we're going to get a quick strike touchdown out of that group. So that's where I'm at. Don't mind the George pairing either, but it seems like Restrepo Wilde is the way to go, especially with the indication that you mentioned you're playing Gronkowski. Do you have a different thought there, or you would be on the Restrepo side as well?
Depends on the contest, I guess, but I think probably would lean Restrepo early in the season and figure out how those other offenses are working. But there's so much floor to Restrepo, so much PPR work and so much involvement. That's hard to get away from.
For sure. All right. We'll just about wrap up here. T-Rock asks you specifically, is Alexander a top play of yours? I know he's a brand play.
He's not. Yeah, it's hard to call him a top play. It is an off the wall brand, confidence in talent, and extreme low ownership GPP play, GPP only type play. But yeah, I would not put him in my top 5 running backs that I want massive exposure to. I would put him in, if you're MMEing, I would allocate 10 to 15% to him in an MME type scenario.
For sure. All right, so we got roughly 20 minutes to lock here. You want to make sure that if you're a member of FTN Fantasy, you're staying tuned in and locked on the CFB DFS Discord channel. We will post any news throughout the day, updates, tilting overall. Before we head out, though, since we have Jake here, we need to get his slate breaker stat line of the day. Lay it on us, brother.
Okay, and usually Walt will have a pretty good idea of who I'm going to go with, and that might be the case here. But we're we're gonna follow up the RJ Maryland call from last week. That was kind of an obvious one, but he still delivered for us. Pretty big game out of RJ Maryland last week. We are gonna go a little bit more aggressive in terms of it being off the wall this week, with Ty Felton going for 7 catches, 120 yards, and 2 touchdowns.
Love it. Ty Felton. I can always count on you. That was a small slate last week, so I can always count on you to deliver a really low owned sneak. And you're very good at these, man. You're very good. We're gonna track them this year and see and put you to the test. But you heard it here. Ty Felton at probable sub 3% ownership. Get him into a GPP lineup somewhere. You will not regret it. All right, about 18 minutes to lock. We're going to get out of here. Thanks, Jake, for joining me Saturday morning early for both of us and all, 280 plus of you that have joined us this morning. Feel free to message us on X/Twitter as well, at DubDeuces85 for me, at SF Giants Guy for Jake, or just get us on the Discord there. We're very active. We put all the stuff in there. Tilt touchdowns, sacrifice things, you name it, we do it. Appreciate you guys' continued support. We'll be back next week, week 2 coverage, Thursday, 9 p.m. PST on the FTN network. Take care, guys. Good luck. Let's get it done today. Green screens and window trips for all.